"He's not a slave, he's my husband." The alien queen's words shook the throne room. Ethan Cross moved like a shadow through the alien forests. The air was thick with silver mist, and the branches above twisted into shapes that did not belong on Earth. Every sound felt sharper here. Every step carried the weight of his mission. He was not a soldier with a rifle this time. He was a spy, a ghost in enemy territory. His orders had been simple on paper. Enter the alien empire. Find out how they forged weapons that could shatter tanks and bring down aircraft with one shot. Record what he could. Escape. Bring the secrets back to Earth. But nothing about this mission felt simple. The empire stretched farther than he imagined. Their technology was frightening, precise, almost alive. He had already slipped past patrols of towering guards clad in armor that glowed faintly blue. He had seen weapons stored inside vaults of crystal, humming as if they had hearts of their own. He drew maps in his mind, noting where the energy fields pulsed, where the towers watched, where the hidden depots glimmered in the night. Every night he crept closer to the truth. Every night he knew the risk grew heavier. On the 7th night he thought he had made it. He crouched by the edge of a ravine, sliding a small device into his pack. The recordings were clear, the evidence undeniable. If he could reach the extraction point, humanity would finally have the answers it needed. But fate did not favor him that night. The sound came first, an alien horn, deep and vibrating through the ground. Then light poured across the trees, a searing beam from above. Ethan bolted, but it was too late. Shadows moved around him, armored soldiers dropping from the sky like predators. He fought, of course. Training ran through his body like instinct. His fist struck, his blade flashed, and for a moment he thought he could cut his way free. But they were stronger, faster, relentless. A heavy blow caught his ribs. Another drove him to his knees. He tasted iron in his mouth. Shackles of burning energy clamped around his wrists. By the time they dragged him into the city, his vision swam, but his mind remained sharp. The throne room was nothing like he expected. It was vast, carved from dark stone and lit by rivers of glowing liquid that flowed across the floor. Hundreds of eyes stared at him. Alien nobles dressed in robes that shimmered like molten silver, guards standing tall with spears that hissed like serpents. At the far end of the hall sat the throne, and on that throne she waited, Queen Leora. Her presence struck him harder than any blow. She was taller than he imagined, her form graceful yet edged with authority. Her eyes burned with a strange light, a shade that shifted between gold and violet. Her crown was no crown at all, but a living halo of fire that swirled and pulsed with her every breath. The soldiers shoved Ethan forward. He stumbled onto the cold floor, chains clattering. The court erupted in laughter. "A human?" One noble scoffed, voice dripping with scorn. "Look at him, frail, pathetic. Is this what dares to spy on us?" Another shouted, "He is no warrior. He is a slave now, a prize for the throne." Their laughter echoed off the walls, a chorus of mockery. Ethan lifted his head. His jaw was bloodied, his body beaten, but his eyes did not bow. He stared straight ahead, calm, unflinching. Queen Leora leaned forward. Her gaze locked on his, sharp and searching. The hall grew quieter. Here was a human in chains, a supposed spy, a fragile outsider. But there was no fear in his stare, no begging, no breaking, and in that silence, something shifted. Ethan Cross, the prisoner, the spy, stood before the queen of an empire, mocked as nothing more than a slave. But in that very moment, though no one else yet saw it, his story had only begun. The chains burned whenever Ethan moved. They were forged from some energy that clung to his skin, humming like a warning that one wrong twitch would bring searing pain. He had learned quickly to keep his movements slow, his face unreadable. The court still laughed at him, but Ethan knew how to survive. A spy who wore his pride on his sleeve was a spy who never returned home. So he bent his head just enough to appear broken. He let his shoulders slump as if beaten. His silence became his disguise. But behind lowered eyes he saw everything. The guards who stood at rigid angles, rotating every hour. The way the palace walls shimmered with protective fields, yet flickered faintly when the river of light beneath the throne dimmed. He noted the smallest details, the cadence of the guard's steps, the hidden corridors behind banners, the key that hung from a captain's waist. Every fragment mattered. To the court, he was a worthless human slave. To Ethan, he was still a spy, recording every secret in his memory. Days bled into weeks. They kept him close to the queen's court, a strange pet meant to amuse the nobles. They jeered at him during meals, tossing scraps at his feet. Some demanded he kneel before them just to laugh at his humiliation. Ethan played his part. He lowered his head when they expected it. He endured their insults, their mockery, the sharp crack of a guard's staff across his back. But his eyes never lost their fire. It was those eyes that Queen Leora noticed. At first, she did not speak to him. She watched. She studied. She saw how other slaves broke quickly, voices trembling, eyes dull with despair. But this human did not crumble. He remained steady, unyielding in a way that unsettled even her. Finally, one evening when the court had dispersed, she spoke. Her voice carried both command and curiosity. "Human, what are you?" Ethan did not answer right away. He weighed every word. One wrong response could mean execution. Too much truth could expose his mission. "I am what you see," he said at last, his tone calm. "A prisoner. Nothing more." Her eyes narrowed. She did not believe him. "You do not kneel," she said. "You do not beg. Even now you meet my gaze without fear. That is not the way of a slave." Ethan let the silence linger, then gave the faintest of smiles. "Perhaps I do not know how to be one." Her lips curved in something almost like amusement, but fleeting. "Careful, human. Words are sharper than blades in this hall." From that night forward, their exchanges grew more frequent. Sometimes brief, sometimes sharp, always layered with a tension neither of them could quite name. She asked questions about Earth, about humans, about why his spirit seemed different from others brought before her. Ethan deflected when he needed to, but he never cowered. His wit was quiet, his answers edged with boldness that surprised her. And slowly, beneath the weight of her crown and the endless expectations of her court, Queen Leora began to feel something she had not felt in a long time. Curiosity that was not about war or power, but about a single human man in chains. Whispers soon began to spread through the palace. Nobles murmured that their queen spent too much time speaking to the slave. Some claimed she was tainting her throne by lowering herself to converse with him. Others warned that such attention would sow unrest. But neither Ethan nor Leora stopped. What began as questions grew into conversations. What began as cautious observation grew into a quiet bond neither of them had expected. Ethan told himself it was all part of his mask, that gaining her trust was another layer of survival. But late at night, when the torches burned low and her voice softened from command to something closer to human, he realized his own mask was slipping. And in her, the queen who had only known loyalty bought through fear and respect born from power, he found a rare honesty. A man who could not kneel even in chains. It was fragile, forbidden, dangerous. And it was only the beginning. Nights in the alien palace were long. The walls themselves seemed alive, pulsing faintly with blue light as if they breathed. From his cell, Ethan could hear the distant rhythm of drums that never stopped, a sound that kept time with the Empire's heartbeat. Most prisoners went mad listening to it. Ethan listened carefully, as though even that pattern might hold secrets. But lately, the nights felt different. Queen Leora had begun visiting him when the court was quiet, when the weight of the crown pressed heavily against her temples and the fire of her halo dimmed. At first, her questions were sharp, each one meant to test him. "What do humans value most?" she asked once, her tone cool, as though the answer was already beneath her. Ethan leaned against the wall, chains rattling softly. "Choice," he said. "The right to live by our own decisions." She studied him for a long moment. "And yet here you are. No choice at all." He gave a faint smile, his voice steady. "Even now I choose how I speak to you. That is something no chain can take. Her gaze lingered, sharper than any blade. For the first time, she did not answer. Another night, she asked about war. Do your people hunger for conquest? Or do you fight because you must? Ethan thought of Earth, of soldiers who fought for survival, of governments that sent spies like him into the unknown. We fight because we have no other way, he said. And because if we do not, we lose everything. Her eyes flickered, as though his words unsettled her. Perhaps she too knew the weight of endless battles. Perhaps she too wondered if conquest was victory, or only a chain of another kind. Slowly, something fragile began to take root between them. To Ethan, she was no longer just a ruler of an enemy empire. She was a woman bound by tradition, trapped in the loneliness of power. Her voice sometimes carried weariness when she thought no one noticed. Her eyes, fierce as fire before the court, softened when she allowed herself to simply be Leora and not the queen. To Leora, this human was no longer a slave, no longer just a curiosity. He was wrapped in restraint, courage hidden beneath humility. He did not tremble before her, and that defiance, quiet, respectful, but unyielding, stirred something within her that her empire's finest warriors could not. But the court was not blind. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to quiet outrage. Nobles who once mocked Ethan now whispered behind silken curtains, their eyes narrow with suspicion. They spoke of dishonor, of the queen risking her throne by indulging in the company of a human. One advisor dared to confront her. Your Majesty, this is dangerous. The people notice. To treat a slave with such attention will weaken your rule. Her answer was cold, her voice laced with steel. Then let them see strength in my choices. Still, the unease grew. The air in the palace felt heavier with every passing day. And Ethan could feel it too. His mission, his reason for being here, whispered at the back of his mind. He was a spy. He had not come to forge bonds or to protect alien queens. He had come for secrets, for escape, for Earth. And yet, when she stood before him, her voice carrying both command and weariness, he felt the lines blur. The spy in him urged caution. But the man in him, the man began to listen to her more than he should. Every night, when her steps faded down the corridor and the glow of her halo disappeared into the distance, he found himself waiting for the next. And in the silence that followed, Ethan Cross realized a truth he did not want to admit. Somewhere between chains and whispers, between stolen conversations and dangerous trust, a forbidden connection had already taken hold. And it would change everything. The palace slept under a sky of burning stars. Towers glowed faintly, their spires reaching high into the dark, each one humming with hidden power. The guards at the outer walls stood in silence, their eyes glowing faintly beneath their helmets. To any outsider, the fortress seemed impenetrable. But Ethan had learned long ago that no place was without weakness. That night, the weakness did not come from the palace walls, but from within them. The first sound was soft, like a whisper of steel against stone. Ethan stirred in his cell, instincts honed from years of training snapping him awake. His eyes adjusted to the dim glow of the energy fields. The shadows in the corridor moved wrong. Too fast, too silent. Assassins. They slipped past guards who fell without a sound, their throats cut before they could raise an alarm. Cloaked in armor that drank the light, they moved like ghosts, their blades curved and glistening with venom. Their target was not a slave in chains. Their target was the queen. Ethan rose slowly, the energy shackles tugging at his wrists. He should have stayed silent. He should have let the empire eat itself from the inside. But when he heard the sudden clash of steel above, the muffled cry of a guard, something inside him made the choice before he could think. His mission, his disguise, his lies, none of it mattered if she died. The door to his cell burst open as two assassins slipped through, their blades dripping. They had not come for him. They were clearing the path. The first lunged without hesitation. Ethan twisted, letting the chain on his wrists catch the assassin's strike. Energy burned into his skin, but he yanked hard, pulling the attacker off balance. His knee drove into the alien's chest, snapping armor with a crack. The The second came fast. Ethan seized the fallen blade, the chain still biting at his wrists, and drove it upward. Blood hissed as it struck the stone floor. For a moment silence returned. Then the screams above told him the fight had only begun. Ethan ran. Shackles sparked with every step, but he ignored the pain. He burst into the queen's chambers just as a shadow fell across her bed. The assassin was already there, blade raised. Ethan did not think. He threw himself forward, chains clattering, the stolen weapon in his hand flashing once in the dark. Steel met steel, sparks flying across the chamber. The assassin hissed, striking again and again, but Ethan blocked, countered, drove forward with every ounce of strength he had left. The final strike split the air. The assassin crumpled, the blade clattering to the floor. For the first time since his capture, Ethan stood unchained in his spirit, even if his wrists still burned with bonds. His chest heaved, blood dripping down his arm, but he had stopped the blade meant for her. Queen Leora rose slowly from her bed, her golden violet eyes wide. For a moment, the fire of her halo dimmed, flickering like a candle in shock. "You?" Her voice trembled, a sound no court had ever heard. "You saved me." Ethan dropped the blade, his knees weakening. "Do not thank me yet," he muttered, glancing at the door where more shadows moved. "They are not finished." And then the chamber erupted. More assassins poured in, their blades singing in the firelight. Ethan fought like a man possessed. He tore the chain from his wrist free of its anchoring bolt, turning it into a whip of burning light. He swung it wide, catching one assassin across the throat, dragging another into his strike. His body screamed with pain, but he pushed harder, faster. Every movement was survival. Every strike was for her. Guards finally arrived, their weapons clashing against the intruders. But it was Ethan who stood at the center, bloodied, unbroken, driving the attack back. When the last assassin fell, silence smothered the room. The queen stood at his side, her eyes fixed not on her fallen enemies, but on the human before her. This man in chains had fought more fiercely than her most loyal guards. He had saved her not once, but again and again in the span of minutes. In that silence, something inside her shifted. She could no longer see him as property. He was not a trophy, not a slave to amuse her court. He was a protector, a warrior, a man whose courage had eclipsed the fear of death. And for the first time in her reign, Queen Leora wondered if her people's hatred for humans was nothing but blindness. Ethan Cross, still bleeding, still bound, had become something more, and the Empire would not forgive her for noticing. By dawn, the palace was already alive with whispers. News of the attack had spread faster than fire in dry grass. The assassins were dead, their bodies dragged through the halls as warnings to others. But it was not their failure that the nobles spoke of. It was the slave, the human, the one who had fought when their own guards faltered. Ethan stood in chains once more, though the marks of battle were still fresh on his skin. Cuts lined his arms, bruises darkened his ribs, but his eyes remained steady. He had expected silence, maybe another cold cell. Instead, he found himself once again dragged before the throne. The court was packed. Nobles lined the walls, their silken robes shimmering like waves of silver fire. Advisors stood rigid, their faces carved from stone. Guards pressed their spears into the marble floor, the sound echoing like a heartbeat. When Queen Leora entered, the room bowed in unison, their voices rising in a practiced chorus. But the moment they saw Ethan behind her, whispers turned to open outrage. "Why is he still alive?" one noble spat. "This is an insult to the throne," cried another. "A human slave defended the queen when her guards failed? It is shameful." Their voices grew louder, tumbling over one another in a storm of fury. Ethan remained silent. He had survived interrogations, torture, missions where one word could betray everything. He would not give them more fuel. But inside, a war raged. He had saved her life, and now his own hung in balance. Queen Leora raised her hand, and the storm quieted, though the rage in their eyes did not. Her voice cut through the hall like steel. "Last night, blades meant for me struck against him, and he stood where you did not. When shadows threatened this throne, it was not your power, nor your guards, that saved me. It was him." Gasps echoed. The nobles shifted, their anger twisting into something darker, fear mixed with defiance. A high lord stepped forward, his robe glittering with embedded crystals. His voice dripped with venom. "Your Majesty, to honor a slave for doing what even an animal would do is dangerous. He is human. He is filth. He should be executed before his presence poisons your court." Murmurs of agreement spread like wildfire. Ethan met Leora's gaze for a brief moment. He said nothing, but in his eyes she saw it, the battle within him. Duty against feeling, mission against bond. He was a spy, meant to gather secrets, not protect her. And yet, when blades had threatened her, he had chosen without hesitation. The queen's voice dropped lower, firm and steady. "If honor exists in this hall, it is not found in your jeweled robes. It is found in courage. And courage has no race, no chain, no master." The words landed like thunder. The nobles bowed reluctantly, but their eyes promised resistance. Even as they obeyed, their whispers crawled across the chamber like knives. Ethan felt the weight of it pressing down on him. He had not meant to be seen. He had not meant to stand out. Yet now he was no longer invisible. That night, back in the dim silence of his cell, Ethan wrestled with his thoughts. He should have kept his distance. He should have let her court tear itself apart. His mission was survival, intelligence, escape. And yet when he closed his eyes, all he saw was the queen standing in the throne room, her voice defiant, her gaze locked on him as if he was more than what the chains said he was. The spy inside him whispered that this was a dangerous path. The man inside him wondered if it was already too late to turn back. The empire was stirring, restless, divided. The storm was no longer outside the palace walls. It was here in the throne room itself. And Ethan Cross, the human spy in chains, had become the eye of it. The grand hall was dressed in firelight, every torch blazing as if the empire itself wished to burn away doubt. Banners of molten silver hung from the walls, and nobles filled every corner, their whispers like a sea of insects buzzing in the dark. This was no ordinary gathering. It was a ceremony of power, meant to restore order, to remind the empire of its strength. And at the center of it all stood Ethan. Chains still bound his wrists, but the court had made sure his humiliation was clear. They dragged him before the throne as if parading a captured beast. Nobles sneered openly, their voices loud enough to echo. "Look at him, the queen's pet, a symbol of weakness, proof that our throne bends before lesser creatures." Every word was meant to cut, but Ethan did not flinch. He stood steady, his gaze fixed forward, unbroken even as the jeers rained down. Queen Leora sat high on her throne, her face carved into calm authority, but inside she burned. She had seen this man fight, bleed, and protect her when no one else did. And yet here he was, mocked before her very court. Her hands clenched at the arms of her throne, but she held her silence, for now. The ceremony began with vows of loyalty, nobles stepping forward to pledge themselves to her reign. It was a performance, hollow words wrapped in silk. The true test of power lay not in their oaths, but in the eyes that watched her every move. And then it happened. The doors at the end of the hall slammed open. Figures cloaked in black poured in, their weapons drawn, their movements fast and merciless. The same assassins who had failed before, now striking bolder, deadlier, with vengeance burning in their eyes. Chaos erupted. Guards scrambled. Nobles screamed. The hall a storm of panic. Ethan's chains clattered as he stepped forward, instinct igniting like fire in his veins. One assassin lunged at the queen, blade raised to pierce her heart. Without thinking, Ethan moved. He caught the chain against the attacker's wrist, twisted, and drove his shoulder into the assassin's chest. The blade clattered to the floor. Another came from the side. Ethan seized the fallen weapon, spun, and struck with precision. Blood hissed against the marble. The hall watched in disbelief. Guards faltered, nobles cowered, yet the chained human fought like a storm given flesh. Every strike was a blur of desperation and fury, his body battered but relentless. He shielded the queen again and again, his frame taking blows that should have ended him. His arms dripped with blood, his breath came ragged, but he did not fall. At last, the final assassin rushed forward, screaming a vow of death. Ethan stepped between him and the throne, his eyes blazing with fire. With a roar, he drove the blade home, the echo of steel against flesh silencing the hall. The assassin collapsed. Ethan staggered, blood running freely down his chest, but he still stood tall, his body a wall between the queen and death. The throne room froze. Nobles stared in stunned silence. The man they had called filth, the slave they mocked, had fought with more loyalty than their finest warriors. He had bled for their queen when they hid behind their silks. And in that silence, a voice slithered from the crowd. Why risk everything for a slave? The words cracked through the hall, cold and sharp. Whispers rose again, each one a dagger of doubt. Queen Leora rose slowly from her throne. Her fire halo blazed higher, brighter, burning with fury and resolve. She stepped down from the dais, her steps echoing against the stone, until she stood at Ethan's side. He swayed, exhausted, bloodied, yet unbroken. Her hand found his, and with her voice steady as thunder, she declared, "He is not a slave. He is my husband." The hall erupted. Some nobles dropped to their knees, pledging themselves in stunned loyalty. Others shouted in outrage, storming from the chamber. Advisors clutched their robes, torn between fear and fury. The court fractured before her, half in obedience, half in rebellion. But none could erase what they had seen. A human had fought with the heart of a king, and the queen of an empire had chosen him. The throne room was a storm of voices. Nobles shouted over one another, their words dripping with venom and disbelief. Some called for rebellion, others swore their allegiance on the spot. Guards stood frozen, unsure whether to defend their queen or arrest her. But in the middle of the chaos, the queen did not waver. Her hand still gripped Ethan's, firm and unshaken. Her halo blazed brighter than the torches, casting firelight across her face. Her voice cut through the storm like a blade. "You call him a slave," she said, her words echoing against the marble walls. "You see chains and weakness. I see courage that none of you showed when death walked into this hall. You bow because you must. He stood because he chose." Gasps rippled through the court. Advisors stared in disbelief, unable to form words. But Leora pressed on, her tone rising with every breath. "You demand I cast him aside to protect tradition. I say tradition is nothing if it blinds us to truth. He saved me when you faltered. He bled for me when you fled. And today, before every eye in this chamber, I name him not slave, but husband. My chosen, my equal, my king." The chamber shook with uproar. Half the nobles roared in outrage, their faces twisted with fury. A few stormed from the hall, their footsteps pounding like drums of war. Yet others dropped to one knee, their voices trembling as they pledged themselves to her will. The empire had been split in a single heartbeat. Ethan swayed on his feet, his body torn and bloodied from battle, but he could not look away from her. In her words, in her fire, he saw a woman who had chosen him not out of pity, not out of weakness, but with defiance against an empire that feared change. He was no longer a spy hiding in the shadows, no longer a prisoner wrapped in chains. He was something greater, something he never expected to become. The queen turned to him, her golden violet eyes steady. "You came here as a stranger," she said softly, so only he could hear. "But you stand here now as my equal. From this day, your place is not behind me, but beside me." For the first time since his capture, Ethan allowed himself to breathe. He had entered this world to steal secrets, but he had found something far more dangerous, far more powerful than weapons. He had found a bond forged not in lies, but in truth, in fire, in choice. The nobles could rage. The empire could fracture. War could rise in the days to come. But none of it could erase what had been spoken in that hall. The spy who came to break an empire now stood as its chosen king. And as Ethan Cross looked at Queen Leora, her fire burning brighter than ever, he knew his mission had changed forever. This was no longer about survival, no longer about escape. This was destiny. Together, human courage and alien power would reshape the empire, and perhaps one day 2 worlds. And so, with the throne room divided, with the future uncertain but alive with possibility, Ethan Cross held the Queen's hand as the dawn of a new age began.